Damian Cross, the most feared mafia boss in all of New York, had never once imagined that he would find himself secretly driving through the streets of Brooklyn at midnight, following the 3-year-old daughter of his housekeeper. He only wanted to make sure the little girl reached home safely. But the moment the door of that narrow, sagging apartment creaked open beneath a flickering yellow streetlight, what Damian Cross saw inside made the man who had made an entire empire tremble stand frozen in the shadows, tears rolling down a face that had not cried in 2 years. And from that night on, his life would never be the same again. 4 months before that night, the story had already begun writing itself in silence. Ravenwood Estate stood on 40 acres of private land in Westchester, New York, surrounded by stone walls that had guarded 3 generations of the Cross family. Black iron gates, cameras on every corner, guards who never smiled and never slept. From the road, it looked like something out of a magazine. White columns, a long gravel drive, gardens trimmed with a precision that bordered on obsession. But nobody driving past those gates could feel what lived inside. Damian was 41 years old. He had buried his wife 2 years ago. A heart that simply stopped one quiet morning while she slept beside him. No warning, no mercy, just silence where a heartbeat used to be. Since then, Damian moved through his own house like a stranger in it. He ate alone. He worked past midnight. He had forgotten, somewhere along the way, what it felt like to want anything at all. He trusted exactly 2 people in this world. His head of security, a broad, quiet man named Marcus Reyes, and his butler of 20 years, Walter Higgins, a soft-spoken man with silver hair and gentle eyes who had served Damian's father before him. Everyone else was staff. Replaceable. Distant. Except, lately, one small girl had started to catch his attention, and he could not say why. Grace Bennett had been the newest housekeeper at Ravenwood for 4 months. She was 29, quiet, careful with her words, the kind of tired that lives behind a person's eyes long after the rest of the face has learned to smile again. She arrived before dawn. She left after dark. 6 days a week. She had a daughter, Lily, 3 years old, small for her age, with serious brown eyes that watched everything and said very little. Grace had no husband. She never spoke of him. The other staff whispered that he had left, or worse, that something had happened to him. Nobody asked Grace directly. There was something in her face that stopped the question before it formed. Damian first noticed something was wrong on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. He was crossing the front hall when he saw Grace through the window, standing at the bus stop beyond the gates at exactly 6:15, holding Lily's small hand, waiting in the cold. He thought nothing of it at first. Staff had lives beyond these walls. It was none of his business how they lived them. But the following week, he noticed it again. Grace, leaving on foot every evening, never once accepting the car service the estate provided to staff living more than a few miles away. She always refused, always with the same tight, polite smile. A third time, he noticed the small details that piled up quietly in his mind. Grace never accepted extra shifts, even when the pay was doubled for holidays. She packed her own lunch in a container that had clearly been repaired with tape more than once. Her coat was too thin for October. Damian said nothing. He was not a man who involved himself in the small sadnesses of other people's lives. He had enough of his own. But one cold evening, standing at his study window with a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, he watched Grace and Lily walk away from the gates together. The little girl's hand swallowed inside her mother's, both of them growing smaller against the gray evening light until they turned a corner and were gone. Something about the way the child walked struck him. Too careful. Too quiet. As if she had already learned, at 3 years old, not to ask for things a mother could not give. He thought of his own house. 30 rooms. Empty of everything but silence and money. He told himself it was nothing. A housekeeper living carefully within her means. It happened every day, in every city, to people no one ever noticed. But that night, lying awake in the dark, a different thought moved through him, quiet and impossible to shake. What if it wasn't nothing at all? By morning, Damian Cross had made a decision he could not fully explain, even to himself. Tonight, when Grace and Lily left through those gates, he would not stand at the window. He would follow them. Damian waited until 600 hours that evening, standing near the tall window of his study, watching the driveway the way a man watches a clock counting down to something he cannot stop. At 6:12, Grace appeared at the side entrance, Lily's small hand wrapped in hers. a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. They walked together toward the gates, the little girl's steps quick to match her mother's pace. Her yellow coat, bright against the gray dusk. Damian told Marcus nothing. He simply said he needed the car, and that he would be driving himself tonight. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but said nothing back. In 12 years, Damian Cross had never once driven himself anywhere after dark. He kept a careful distance behind them in a plain black sedan, the kind that drew no attention on any street in the city. Grace and Lily walked 3 blocks to a bus stop. He watched them board a city bus, its windows fogged with the breath of tired passengers heading home. He followed the bus through Manhattan traffic, then across the bridge into Brooklyn, the skyline shrinking behind him, the streets growing narrower, the buildings older, the streetlights fewer and further between. The bus stopped in a neighborhood Damian had not set foot in for 15 years. Faded brick buildings, a shuttered laundromat, a corner store with bars on the windows and a flickering sign that had lost half its letters. Grace and Lily stepped off the bus. They walked 5 more blocks, Lily's small legs working hard to keep up, her hand never once leaving her mother's. Damian parked half a block back and sat in the dark, engine off, watching. He told himself he would only watch them reach the door, only make sure they arrived safely. Nothing more. Grace stopped in front of a narrow apartment building, its brick stained dark with age, a metal fire escape zigzagging up the front like a scar. She dug through her bag for keys with the particular exhaustion of someone who has done this exact motion 10,000 times. That was when Damian noticed something that made his chest go tight. Lily was not walking toward the door. She was standing very still at the edge of the sidewalk, looking up at the building's 3rd floor, where one window glowed faintly behind a thin curtain. She was not looking at the window the way a child looks at something with wonder. She was looking at it the way a person looks at something they are afraid of. Grace turned, saw her daughter frozen there, and knelt down in front of her on the cold sidewalk. Damian could not hear the words. He could only watch Grace's mouth moving gently, watch her hands cup her daughter's small face, watch Lily nod once, slowly, the way a child nods when she is being brave for someone else's sake. Grace stood, took her daughter's hand again, and this time Lily did not walk beside her. She let herself be carried. Damian sat frozen in the driver's seat, his hand tight on the wheel, watching a woman he barely knew climb a set of broken concrete steps with her exhausted child cradled against her shoulder, disappearing through a door that did not close all the way behind them. He should have driven away right then. He had seen enough. He had confirmed what he already suspected, that his housekeeper lived a hard life in a hard part of the city, the same as 1,000 other women in this city did every single day. But his hand did not move to the key. Instead, he found himself stepping out of the car, into the cold, walking toward that same building, toward that same door left just slightly open behind them. He told himself he only wanted to see that they were safe inside. He climbed the stairs slowly, quietly, the way a man climbs stairs when some part of him already knows he should not be doing this at all. At the 3rd floor, one door stood ajar, a thin blade of pale yellow light spilling into the hallway. And through that gap, Damian Cross heard something that stopped him cold on the stairs. It was Lily's voice. Small. Trembling. And it was saying a name he did not expect to hear at all. "Daddy, are you still cold in there?" Damian went still on the stairs, one hand pressed flat against the wall. Daddy. Grace had no husband. Grace had told the staffing agency months ago that she was a widow, that her husband had died before Lily was even born. He should have turned around right then. Whatever this was, it was not his business. He had already crossed a line no employer should cross, following a housekeeper and her child through the dark streets of Brooklyn like some kind of ghost. But his feet did not move. Through the gap in the door, he could see a small room. A single bed pushed against the wall. A kitchenette with 2 burners, one of them clearly broken. A space heater in the corner, its orange coil glowing weakly, doing almost nothing against the cold that had settled into every corner of the apartment. And on a narrow cot near the window, half covered by a thin gray blanket, lay a man. He was young, maybe 30. His skin had the pale, waxy look of someone who had not seen sunlight in a long time. A tube ran from his arm to a bag hanging from a metal stand beside the bed. The kind of medical equipment that belonged in a hospital, not in a room with peeling paint and a window that did not seal against the wind. Lily knelt beside the cot, her small hand resting on the man's arm. "I brought you the drawing, Daddy. I made the sun really big today." The man's eyes opened slowly. His voice, when it came, was thin as paper. "You always make the sun big, baby." "Just like you." Grace stood at the foot of the bed, her coat still on, her canvas bag still over her shoulder, watching the two of them with an expression Damian recognized instantly, because he had worn it himself once. It was the face of someone watching a person they loved disappear one day at a time, and being powerless to stop it. "Ethan," Grace said softly, "you need to eat something." "I brought soup." "In a minute," the man said. His eyes drifted toward Lily. "Tell me about school today." Lily began to talk, quiet and careful, about a picture she had painted, about a boy who had shared his crayons, about a butterfly she had seen on the walk to the bus stop. She spoke the way children speak when they have learned that these small, ordinary stories are the only gift they have left to give. Damian stood frozen in the hallway, his heart slamming against his ribs. Grace had not lost her husband. She was watching him die, slowly, in a room with a broken stove and a space heater that could not keep out the cold. Working 6 days a week at Ravenwood Estate, keeping this secret buried so deep that not even her employer's household staff had guessed at it. He thought of the 30 empty rooms at Ravenwood, the fireplaces that burned every night, whether anyone sat in front of them or not. The wine cellar worth more than this entire building. He thought of himself, alone in that enormous house, mourning a wife he could no longer help, while 3 blocks and a bridge away, a woman he saw every single day was fighting a battle just as brutal, completely alone, and had never once asked him for anything. Grace knelt beside the cot and began to help Ethan sit up enough to eat. Her hands were gentle. Her voice stayed steady, though Damian could see now, in the yellow lamplight, that her eyes were rimmed red, the way eyes look after months, maybe years, of crying only after the lights go out and the child is asleep. "How long?" Ethan asked quietly. "Until the next treatment." Grace's hands paused for just a second over the spoon. 2 weeks, she said. "If we can get the rest of the money together." Ethan closed his eyes. "Grace, don't." Her voice cracked, just slightly, on the single word. "We are not having this conversation again." Not in front of her. Lily had gone very quiet, watching her parents with those serious brown eyes, the eyes of a child who understood far more than either of them wanted her to. Damian stood in the hallway outside that door, a man who could move $10 million with a single phone call. Listening to a family running out of time over a sum of money he would not even notice missing from one of his accounts. His hand was still pressed to the wall. He realized, distantly, that it was shaking. He took one step back, meaning to leave quietly, to disappear back down the stairs the way he had come, to pretend he had never seen any of this. His shoulder caught the edge of a metal trash can left in the hallway. It fell with a crash that echoed through the entire stairwell. Inside the apartment, everything went silent. Then Damian heard footsteps crossing the floor fast, toward the door. And there was no time left to run. The door pulled open before Damian could move. Grace stood in the frame, one hand still gripping the handle, her eyes wide with the particular fear of a woman who lived every day expecting the worst to finally arrive. When she saw who was standing in the hallway, the fear did not leave her face. If anything, it deepened. "Mr. Cross." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Behind her, Damian could see Lily peering around her mother's legs and past her. Ethan struggling to lift himself higher against the pillows, alarm written plainly across his gaunt face. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Damian had faced armed men without blinking. He had sat across tables from other bosses discussing matters that could end in blood before the night was through, and none of it had ever made his chest feel as tight as it did now, standing in this narrow hallway, caught spying on the private grief of a woman who worked in his own house. "I didn't mean to," he started, then stopped. There was no version of this sentence that made any sense. He had followed her. He had climbed her stairs. He had stood outside her door listening to a conversation that was never meant for him. "I'm sorry," he said instead, and meant it more than he had meant anything in a long time. "I saw you and Lily leave the estate tonight, and I was worried. I shouldn't have followed you. I have no excuse for it." Grace's hand tightened on the door. "Please don't take this the wrong way, sir, but this isn't something I can explain to you tonight. I need to get back to my husband." "Grace." Ethan's voice, thin as it was, carried from the bed. "Let him in." Grace turned, startled. "Ethan." "He already knows more than we wanted him to know. Standing in the hallway won't undo that." Ethan's eyes found Damian's over his wife's shoulder. There was no anger in them, Only a terrible, quiet exhaustion. Come in, Mr. Cross. Since you've come this far. Grace stepped aside, though every line of her body said she did not want to. The apartment was smaller inside than it had looked from the hallway. One room, really, divided by nothing more than a folding screen that gave the illusion of separate spaces. The space heater ticked and glowed in the corner, losing its battle against the draft that crept in around the window frame. Damian stood just inside the door, feeling, for the first time in 20 years, entirely out of place. Leukemia, Ethan said before Damian could ask. Diagnosed 18 months ago. We tried everything the insurance would cover. Then everything it wouldn't. He gestured weakly at the IV stand beside him. This is at-home palliative treatment now. It buys time. Not much else. Lily had climbed onto the bed beside her father, curling into his side the way children do when they sense the air in a room has changed, seeking comfort without understanding exactly what has frightened them. Grace works 6 days a week to keep this apartment, Ethan continued. To keep the treatments coming when we can afford them. She hasn't told anyone at Ravenwood. She was afraid. He stopped, glancing at his wife. Afraid of what? Damian asked quietly. Grace answered, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes fixed on the floor. Afraid that a sick husband and a sad story would make me look like a liability. Like someone who couldn't focus on the job. Housekeepers get replaced every day, Mr. Cross. I couldn't risk it. Not with him needing this. She nodded toward the IV stand. Not with her needing us both. Damian looked at Lily, small and quiet against her father's side, her drawing of the two big sons still clutched in one hand. And he thought of all the mornings he had passed this woman in his own hallways without ever once truly seeing her. How much, he asked, is 2 weeks? Grace's head snapped up. Mr. Cross, I did not tell you any of this so you would. How much, Grace? She hesitated a long moment. When she finally said the number, it was so small that Damian felt something in his chest twist painfully. A number that would not cover 1 week of the wine he kept in his cellar. A number standing between a man's life and the absence of it. He said nothing for a moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. Mr. Cross, please. I'm not giving you charity, Damian said, his voice quiet but final. I'm correcting an oversight. No employee of mine should be carrying something like this alone. That is a failure on my part, not a kindness on yours to accept. He typed something into the phone, then looked up at Ethan, at the tube in his arm, at the gray blanket that did nothing against the cold leaking in through the window frame. This building, Damian said slowly. How long is your lease? Ethan blinked. Sir, answer the question. Month to month, Ethan said. Why? Damian looked around the small room once more, the broken stove, the failing heater, the child sleeping some nights, he suspected, in her coat. Because you're not staying here, he said. Not one more night than necessary. Grace stared at him, her mouth slightly open, as though she could not decide whether to be grateful or terrified of what accepting his help might cost her in the end. She did not yet know that the offer forming in Damian Cross's mind would change everything, not just for her family, but for the empire he had spent 20 years building. And somewhere across the city, a man who had been quietly waiting for exactly this kind of weakness to appear in Damian Cross was about to find out that his enemy had found something worth protecting again. By midnight, Damian was back in his car, driving away from that narrow street in Brooklyn. But nothing in him felt the way it had 4 hours earlier. He called Marcus from the road. I need a private oncologist. The best in the city. I don't care what it costs or who I have to move around to get an appointment tomorrow morning. Marcus, used to receiving strange orders at strange hours, did not ask questions. For who, sir? Damian hesitated only a second. For family. He gave the address in Brooklyn. He gave instructions for a moving company to be at that building by 8 the next morning. He gave the name of a property manager who owed him a favor, and told him there was a furnished 2-bedroom apartment sitting empty in a building Damian owned in Riverdale, 20 minutes from the estate, with an elevator, working heat, and a view of the river. Have it ready by tomorrow evening, Damian said. Fully stocked. Groceries, medical equipment, whatever a home health nurse needs to set up an infusion room. Marcus was quiet for a moment. This is a lot of movement for a housekeeper, sir. She's not just a housekeeper, Damian said, and something in his own voice surprised him. And not anymore. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his study with the fire burning low, staring at the empty rooms of Ravenwood in a way he had not looked at them in 2 years. Not as a mausoleum for his grief, but as space. Space that could hold a family that needed it far more than he needed the silence. He thought of Lily's small hand resting on her father's arm. He thought of the drawing of the too big sun. He did not notice, until nearly 3 in the morning, that his phone had lit up with a message from a number he did not recognize. Word travels fast, cousin. Didn't know you had a soft spot left in you. Careful who you let get close. Soft spots make good targets. Damian's stomach went cold. The message had come from a burner number, but the word cousin told him everything he needed to know. Only one person in his life used that word with that particular edge to it. Victor Cross, his father's brother's son. The only blood relative Damian had left since his parents passed, and a man who had spent the last 3 years quietly building resentment over an inheritance structure that had left him managing the family's shipping interests in New Jersey while Damian controlled everything else. Victor had never said a cruel word to Damian's face. He came to family dinners twice a year, smiling, easy, generous with compliments about how well Damian ran things. But Damian had learned long ago that in this world, the men who smiled the widest were rarely the ones you should trust the most. How had Victor already known about tonight? Damian had told no one but Marcus, and Marcus's loyalty had never once wavered in 12 years. Someone inside the estate was talking. Someone close enough to see him leave tonight, and fast enough to report it before sunrise. Damian sat with the phone in his hand for a long time, the fire popping softly in the hearth, an old, familiar cold settling back into his chest. The cold of a man who has just remembered that in his world, no kindness ever goes unnoticed by the people who wish to use it against him. He thought of Grace, asleep now, he hoped, beside her dying husband. He thought of Lily's small face turned up toward a lit window, afraid of what waited behind it. He had wanted, for one night, to simply be a man helping a family in trouble. But Victor's message made one thing very clear. Somewhere inside Ravenwood Estate, in a house of 30 rooms and a staff of dozens, there was a traitor. And that traitor had just handed Victor Cross the exact kind of weakness he had been waiting 3 years to find. Damian rose from his chair and walked to the window, looking out over the dark lawn toward the stone wall at the far end of the property. The same wall Lily used to disappear behind on quiet afternoons, on her way to visit a father the world was never supposed to know about. Whatever kindness he offered that family now would have to be protected. Fiercely. Immediately. Because somewhere out there, in the dark, Victor Cross was already deciding exactly how to turn Damian's one soft spot into a weapon aimed straight at his heart. By 7 the next morning, Damian stood in his study watching the security feed from the front gates, waiting for a black car to appear at the end of the drive. Dr. Amara Okafor arrived at 8:15 exactly, a sharp, composed woman in her 50s who had treated 2 former presidents and had a reputation for never once speaking to the press. Damian had called in a favor 3 years old to get her here on a single night's notice. He drove her to Riverdale himself. The apartment Marcus had arranged was already transformed, fresh paint still faintly sharp in the air. A hospital bed set up in the smaller bedroom, angled toward a window that looked out over the river, gray and glittering in the cold morning light. A home health nurse, hired through an agency that asked no questions when the check cleared, stood quietly by the door. Grace opened the door to find Damian standing there with a doctor beside him, and for a moment she simply stared, one hand pressed flat against her chest, as though trying to keep something inside her from breaking loose. "Mr. Cross, I don't understand." "You don't have to understand it right now," Damian said. "You just have to let her look at him." Ethan was moved that same morning, wrapped in blankets, carried down the same broken concrete steps he had likely not walked down himself in weeks, and driven 20 minutes to a building with a working elevator and a room full of light. Dr. Okafor examined him for nearly 2 hours. When she finally stepped out into the hallway where Damian and Grace waited, her face gave nothing away. The practiced stillness of someone who had delivered every kind of news there was. "The leukemia has progressed further than it should have," she said carefully, "largely because he has not had consistent treatment. With the right protocol, starting immediately, I believe we have a real chance of pushing this into remission. Not a guarantee, but a chance that did not exist for him yesterday." Grace made a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a laugh, both fighting for the same breath. Lily, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the new apartment with a box of crayons Damian had thought to have delivered, looked up from her drawing and asked, in the plain, direct way of a 3-year-old, "Is Daddy going to get better now?" Nobody answered right away. Damian knelt down slowly in front of her, the way he had not knelt in front of a child in longer than he could remember. Your daddy has a lot of very smart doctors helping him now, he said. That's a very good start. Lily studied him with those serious brown eyes, the same eyes that had watched a lit window with fear only the night before. Then she held up her drawing. A yellow sun, enormous, taking up nearly the entire page, drawn in the careful, heavy strokes of a child who believed that if she made it big enough, it might actually warm someone up. I made another one, she said, for the new house. Damian looked at that ridiculous, beautiful sun for a long moment and felt something crack open in his chest that had been sealed shut since the morning his wife had not woken up beside him. He did not have long to sit with the feeling. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Marcus. Sir, you need to see this. See what? Security caught someone accessing the servants' quarters file room last night, digging through employment records. Whoever it was knew exactly where Grace Bennett's personnel file was kept. Damian's jaw tightened. Do we have a face? We have a face, Marcus said. But sir, you're not going to like whose name is on the access log. Damian stood, walked to the window of the apartment, and looked down at the gray river below. Lily's oversized yellow sun still bright in the corner of his eye. Tell me, he said quietly. Marcus said the name, and every ounce of warmth that had filled Damian Cross in the last hour turned, in an instant, to something much colder and far more dangerous. Walter, Marcus said again, quieter this time, as if saying it softly might somehow soften what it meant. Walter Higgins, sir. His access code. His timestamp. 11:40 last night. For a moment, Damian said nothing at all. Walter had served this family for 20 years. He had poured Damian's father his evening scotch every night for 15 of those years. Straightened Damian's tie before his own wedding. Stood at the back of the church the day they buried Damian's wife. Silent tears running down a face that never once let itself fall apart in front of the family he served. There has to be an explanation, Damian said, though even as the words left his mouth, they sounded thin to his own ears. I thought so too, Marcus said. So I pulled the call logs on the house line before I brought this to you. Walter placed a call at 11:52 last night, 4 minutes long, to a number registered to a shell company out of New Jersey. Damian's stomach turned to stone. New Jersey. Victor's territory. Victor's shipping company. Victor's entire operation ran out of ports along that stretch of coastline. Bring him to the estate, Damian said, quietly. I don't want the rest of the staff to know anything is wrong. And Grace, the girl. The husband? Damian looked back through the apartment doorway, where Lily was carefully taping her enormous yellow sun to the wall beside her father's new bed, humming something tuneless and happy under her breath, while Grace stood with both hands pressed over her mouth, watching her daughter smile for what looked like the first time in a very long while. Double the security on this building, Damian said. Nobody gets near them. Nobody. If Victor already knows about Grace, he'll assume I've made her important to me. That makes her a target whether I like it or not. He ended the call and stood very still for a moment, watching the river below, gray and indifferent, sliding past the window as though nothing in the world had changed at all. He drove back to Ravenwood alone, the same silence in the car that had filled it for 2 years. Except now it carried a different weight entirely. Not grief. Something sharper. Something that had teeth. Walter was waiting in the small sitting room off the east hall when Damian arrived, standing near the window with his hands folded in front of him the way he always stood, silver hair combed neatly back, his expression composed into the same gentle mask he had worn every day for 20 years. But his eyes, when he turned to face Damian, held something Damian had never seen in them before. Fear. Sir, Walter said. You wanted to see me? Damian closed the door behind him and did not sit down. Tell me about your phone call last night, Walter. 11:52. 4 minutes. To New Jersey. Walter's composure did not break all at once. It cracked slowly, the way old plaster cracks along a seam that has been weakening for years without anyone noticing. Sir, I can explain. Then explain. Walter's hands, folded so calmly a moment ago, began to tremble. He looked down at them as though they belonged to someone else. They have my granddaughter, he said, so quietly Damian nearly missed it. Since Tuesday. They sent me a photograph. She was at her school in Yonkers. In the photograph, There was a man standing close enough to touch her. The room went very still. Who? Damian said, though he already knew. Victor's men, Walter whispered. He came to me himself 3 days ago. He said if I didn't help him find something he could use against you, something personal, something that would make you careless, they would take her from the schoolyard, and I would never see her again. Damian felt the floor tilt slightly beneath him. So you searched Grace's file. I had no choice, sir. I swear to you, I did not know what he intended to do with it. I only knew what he threatened to do to her if I refused. Walter's voice broke entirely now, 20 years of composure dissolving into the raw sound of a grandfather who had run out of options. Please, Mr. Cross. Please. She's only 7 years old. Damian stood in the center of that quiet sitting room, staring at a man he had trusted with his own father's dying words, now trembling before him with a confession that changed absolutely everything. Victor was no longer simply threatening Damian's new soft spot from a distance. He had already been inside Ravenwood's walls for 3 days, moving pieces into place, and he had a child's life in his hands as leverage. Damian's phone buzzed once in his pocket. A text. No name attached. Just a number he now recognized. Nice apartment in Riverdale, cousin. Great view of the water. Shame if something happened to spoil it. Damian's blood went cold. Victor already knew exactly where Grace and Ethan and Lily were sleeping tonight. Damian read the message twice, then looked up at Walter, who stood frozen by the window, his face gray with the particular horror of a man who has just realized his silence has not protected anyone at all, not his granddaughter. Not the family he had unknowingly endangered, not even himself. He's watching the building, Damian said quietly. Right now. Sir, I never told him the address, I swear it. I only gave him the personnel file. You didn't have to give him the address. Damian's voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a man doing calculations behind perfectly still eyes. He followed my car this morning. Or he followed Dr. O'Keefe's. Either way, he doesn't need you anymore, Walter. Which means your granddaughter is no longer useful to him as leverage. Walter's face went white. Then he'll let her go the moment he thinks he's already won, Damian said. Or he'll use her as insurance in case tonight doesn't go the way he plans. We're not waiting to find out which. He was already moving, phone against his ear, Marcus answering on the first ring. I need a team to that school in Yonkers within the hour. Discreet. Walter's granddaughter. If Victor's men are anywhere near her, I want them gone before she ever knows anyone was watching. And I need every man we have on the Riverdale building, now, without making it obvious we know anything. And Victor? Marcus asked. Damian looked out the window toward the stone wall at the edge of the property. The same wall a small girl in a yellow coat used to disappear behind on quiet afternoons, carrying love to a dying father in secret. Victor wants me distracted, Damian said. So let's give him exactly what he's asking for. Send 2 teams to Riverdale in an obvious car. Let him think we're panicking, moving them again. Meanwhile, the real security doubles quietly from the inside through the building's own staff. I want eyes on every entrance he can't see. By 4 that afternoon, Walter's granddaughter had been collected from her school under the guise of a family emergency. The man watching her from a parked car 2 blocks away picked up quietly by Rocco's team before he ever realized his target was gone. She was delivered safely to her mother's house in Yonkers with 2 guards stationed outside, unmarked, invisible, permanent. Walter wept when Marcus called to confirm it. He wept the way a man weeps when a weight he has carried in silence for days is finally, suddenly, lifted from his chest. I don't deserve this kindness, sir, Walter said, when Damian came to see him afterward. Not after what I did. You didn't do it for money, Damian said. You did it because you had no other way to protect someone you loved. I understand that better than you think. He paused at the door. You'll stay on staff, Walter. But Victor is never to hear from you again. If he contacts you, you come straight to me. Do you understand? Walter nodded, unable to speak. In Riverdale, Grace had no idea any of this was happening. She sat beside Ethan's hospital bed that evening while Dr. O'Keefe's nurse adjusted his IV, watching color slowly, faintly, begin to return to her husband's face for the first time in months. Lily sat on the floor with her crayons, adding a small yellow dog to the corner of her drawing, humming. She did not know that outside, in the gathering dark, a war was quietly being fought over her family's safety by a man she had known for 4 months as nothing more than a stern, silent employer. At 9:40 that night, one of the decoy guards outside the Riverdale building radioed in. A dark sedan had pulled up across the street. Park. Engine off. Two men inside, unmoving, watching the entrance. Damian was already in the car, Marcus beside him, when the second call came through. Sir, it's not Victor's men in that sedan. It's Victor himself. Damian's hand tightened on the door handle. Victor Cross had never once, in 3 years of quiet resentment, shown his face at the edge of a conflict. He sent men. He sent messages. He stayed clean, distant, untouchable. Tonight, for the first time, he had come himself, which meant that whatever Victor was planning for that building tonight, he no longer cared whether Damian knew his face when it was over. Damian's car cut through the dark streets of Riverdale in 11 minutes, half the normal time. Marcus silent beside him with a hand resting on the weapon inside his jacket, the city sliding past the windows in smears of orange streetlight. Talk to me, Damian said. Sedan hasn't moved, came the voice through the radio. Two men inside. No movement toward the building yet. Could be waiting for something. Or someone, Damian said quietly. They parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, staying to the shadows along the row of buildings. The river a flat black ribbon at the end of the street. Damian could see the sedan now, exactly where the guard had described it, and behind the wheel, unmistakable even in the dim light, sat Victor Cross. He was not hiding. He sat with the window rolled halfway down, one arm resting against the frame, watching the entrance to the apartment building with the patient stillness of a man who believed, completely, that he had already won. Damian stepped out of the shadows alone, waving Marcus back with one hand. Victor saw him coming and did not startle. He only smiled, the same easy, practiced smile he had worn at every family dinner for 3 years. Cousin, Victor said, rolling the window down the rest of the way. I wondered how long it would take you to come out here yourself. Get out of the car, Victor. Or what? Victor's smile did not move. You'll do something reckless in front of a building full of innocent people? That's not how you operate, Damian. You're careful. Controlled. It's the thing I always admired about you, and the thing that's going to cost you everything. He glanced toward the lit window on the 3rd floor, where a small shadow moved briefly behind thin curtains. Lily, no doubt, still awake, still drawing. A housekeeper. A sick husband. A little girl with a crayon sun taped to the wall. You've built yourself quite a soft spot, Damian. After 2 years of being untouchable, you finally gave me something to aim at. You won't touch them. I don't need to touch them, Victor said. I only need the rest of the family to believe you would let something happen to them, because you were too busy protecting outsiders. Half the captains already whisper that grief has made you weak. Tonight, I make sure the whisper becomes certainty. He reached into his jacket, slow, deliberate, and Damian's whole body went taut. But what Victor withdrew was not a weapon. It was a folded document, thick, official-looking, sealed with a notary's stamp. A formal petition to the family council, signed by 4 captains already, questioning your fitness to continue leading. Distracted. Sentimental. Compromised by a housekeeper and her charity case of a husband. It only needs 6 signatures to force a vote. Damian stared at the document in Victor's hand and understood, in one cold, clear instant, that the sedan outside the building tonight was never meant to be a physical attack at all. It was a message. A performance. Proof, staged for anyone watching, that Damian Cross had let his empire's enemy park outside his new family's door and done nothing but stand in the street and talk. You wanted me to see you, Damian said slowly. You wanted witnesses. Victor's smile widened, and for the first time, Damian saw something underneath it that was not amusement at all, but a hunger 3 years old, patient and starving. I wanted the captains watching the cameras on this street to see exactly how far you'd go for people who aren't even blood. And I wanted you to see, cousin, that no matter how many guards you post, no matter how many doctors you fly in, I can always find a way to make you choose. Between them. He nodded toward the window. And everything you've spent your whole life building. He rolled the window back up, unhurried, and the sedan's engine came to life with a low growl. The vote will be called within the week, Victor said through the closing gap of glass. Choose carefully, Damian. You always do. The car pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner, taillights shrinking into the dark, leaving Damian standing alone on the cold street, staring up at a single lit window where a 3-year-old girl had no idea that the fragile, Borrowed happiness inside that apartment had just become the opening move in a war for everything her rescuer had ever built. Damian did not sleep that night, nor the one after it. The petition moved through the family's inner circle exactly as Victor had promised. 6 signatures became a certainty within 4 days, not because the captains believed Damian was truly compromised, but because fear moves faster than loyalty in a world built on both. A council meeting was called for the following Friday, in the old boardroom above the family's shipping office in Manhattan, the same room where Damian's father had once ruled without question. Marcus warned him the numbers were close. Too close. You could deny it, Marcus said, the night before the vote. Tell them the housekeeper means nothing. Distance yourself publicly. It would end this in an afternoon. Damian sat by the fire in his study, the same fire that had burned low and lonely for 2 years, and thought of a small hand resting on a dying man's arm, of a drawing of an enormous yellow sun taped quickly to a hospital room wall, of the first time in 2 years he had felt something in his chest besides silence. No, he said. The boardroom on Friday held 11 men seated around a long table, Victor among them, calm, composed, already wearing the expression of a man who expected to win. Damian walked in without notes, without lawyers, without a single prepared defense. He simply told them the truth. He told them about a housekeeper who had worked 6 days a week to keep her dying husband alive without ever once asking her employer for help. He told them about a 3-year-old girl who had learned, before the age of 3, to be brave for people twice her age. He told them that he had spent 2 years running an empire from inside a house that felt like a grave, and that watching one small child fight harder for her family than he had fought for anything in years had reminded him what all of this, the money, the power, the 30 empty rooms, was actually supposed to be for. You call it weakness, Damian said, looking directly at Victor. I call it the only decision I've made in 2 years that I'm not ashamed of. Then he set a single folder on the table. Inside it, bank records tracing Victor's shell company in New Jersey, phone logs connecting Victor directly to the threats made against Walter's granddaughter, and a sworn, recorded statement from Walter himself, given freely, admitting everything. Ask yourselves, Damian said quietly, which cousin around this table used a 7-year-old girl as leverage to seize power, and which one spent his own money keeping a stranger's family alive, expecting nothing in return. The room was silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, the captains who had signed the petition began withdrawing their names. Victor was expelled from the family council within the hour, stripped of his shipping interests, and given a choice rarely extended in that world: exile, quiet and permanent, or a war he could not win. He chose exile. He left the country 3 weeks later and was never spoken of at Ravenwood again. Spring came slowly to the estate that year, the way it always does after a long winter. But this time the house did not feel like it was waiting anymore. Ethan's leukemia moved into remission 4 months after that night in Riverdale. He grew stronger by inches, first able to sit up on his own, then to walk the length of the apartment, then, on a warm April afternoon, to walk across the wide lawn at Ravenwood, Lily's small hand tucked inside his, no longer needing to be carried at all. Damian offered them a place on the estate grounds, not as staff, but as neighbors, in a small guest house near the old stone wall Lily used to disappear behind on her secret afternoons. Grace hesitated for weeks before accepting, the way people do when kindness this large has to be learned all over again before it can be trusted. Lily's drawings began appearing on the walls of Damian's study, one at a time, taped up crooked by small hands that never quite got the corners straight. Sons, mostly. Always too big for the page. On the evening Ethan took his first unassisted walk across the lawn, Damian stood at his study window and watched the 3 of them together in the fading gold light. Grace laughing at something her husband said. Lily running ahead of them both toward the old stone wall, no longer hiding anything at all, and felt, for the first time since the morning his wife had not woken beside him, something that was not grief. He kept, framed on his desk from that day forward, the first drawing Lily had ever given him. A yellow sun, enormous, crayon strokes pressed so hard into the paper they had nearly torn through it. Because sometimes the smallest hands carry the heaviest kindness. And sometimes a man has to lose his way completely before a 3-year-old girl, without meaning to, shows him exactly how to find it again.